Hello, everybody, and welcome into the virtual speaker session presented by the Penn State Alumni Association. I'm Paul Clifford, and we look forward to visiting with Dr. Derrick Taff in just a couple minutes. I see the room is filling up here with over 45 attendees now. Go ahead and see if that chat function works. Tell us who you are and where you're zooming in from, and what your Penn State class year is. Given the topic today, if you want to share what your favorite national park is, go ahead and share that as well. Again, welcome in to the virtual speaker session. We will be getting started in just a couple minutes. Drop in the chat where you're zooming in from in your Penn State class year and your favorite national park, or maybe the one you've most recently visited. We will be starting in just a couple minutes. All right, I see Josette has joined us. She put down Yellowstone. Michelle Moore, proud of her 1985 Wrexham Park Management. Tuning in to see I guess a professor you may have had if you were in that program today. Melissa from Maryland, class of '86, welcome. Looking to go to Yellowstone in September. Marcia Novak put down Yosemite. She is out in Los Angeles, class of '75 and '78. And Stephen Carroll Schnell, tuning in from Reading, 1971. I see Gettysburg, I see Zion, I see Acadia National Park, Yellowstone, Tetons, Rocky Mountain. Headed out to Glacier. Oh, all four of those this September. That's Mary from the class of '77 has a big trip planned. Thank you all for tuning in. We will be getting started in just a couple minutes. Go ahead and drop into the chat box who you are and where you're from in your Penn State class year, and your favorite national park. See, Jeff has tuned in from the class of '97. He put Rocky Mountain National Park. I see Bryce Canyon from Beth Nagy. Shenandoah National Park. Cheryl Harrison is a fan of Shenandoah. Mount Rainier, Yellowstone. See Lauren from the class of '90. The Grand Canyon National Park. Krista tuning in from New York City. She likes Glacier and Valley Forge. Again, welcome everybody to the virtual speaker series. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes. I see Peter Mecca from Herndon, Virginia. Shenandoah National Park. You don't live too far from there. Shelley Vaughn likes Yellowstone. She's from the class of 1984. Welcome. Andrea Myers is zooming in from Erie today. She got to visit Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain National Park. Kelly Morganti loves Yellowstone, and Yellowstone loves her. I see John and Deb Hoover from the class of '74 and '75. They're big fans of Glacier National Park. Kim McGinnis from '84 likes Denali. And Linda gives a shout out to Grand Canyon. Welcome everybody in. Over 79 participants in the Zoom today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your support of the Penn State Alumni Association. we are going to go ahead and get started right now and wish everybody a good afternoon. And thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association. And I realize that you can't see me, but I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker session. As a reminder, today's discussion is being recorded. Today, we welcome Dr. Derrick Taff, Assistant Professor in the Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management Department here at Penn State. Today's discussion is the latest installment of a recurring series of virtual programming brought to you by the Penn State Alumni Association. You can find all information about upcoming events and all of our virtual programming on our website at alumni.psu.edu/events. And now I'm happy to welcome Dr. Derrick Taff. National parks are more popular than ever, and visitors seek these national treasures for the positive benefits they receive from recreating in these pristine places. But as visitation has increased, so has the amount of impact to the natural resources in these parks. Research from our Penn State team has informed visitor management in a manner that protects the natural resources and maximizes the benefits visitors receive through these experiences in these special places. Our research has spanned the U.S. and parks from Georgia to Alaska, and this talk will highlight how research at Penn State aids in protecting human and ecological well-being in our national treasures. Dr. Taff's research strives to improve communication strategies aimed at influencing human and environmental health in parks and in protected areas. Much of his research has focused on leave no trace behind based communication strategies and how to positively influence human perceptions and behaviors in a manner that promotes social and ecological well-being. Dr. Taff has traveled with us a couple times. He has hosted 2 Alumni Association trips, which we offer to destinations across the country and around the globe. You can find more details at alumni.psu.edu/travel, which includes information on a trip in September and October of 2021 to Yosemite, Death Valley, and the great parks of California. Now to today's discussion. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Taff.
Paul and everyone, thank you for having me. I'm going to just share my screen here and hope that that works. I've gotten much better at sharing screen and Zoom in light of our recent situation. Give me just a second. That was a great introduction. I'm sorry, that was a mouthful. So thanks everybody for joining me. My name's Derrick Taff. I'm a social scientist, and we're going to start out with a little exercise that Paul nicely introduced and maybe produced a little bias for us. Got you thinking about your favorite place. I want you to think about your happy place for a minute. Take a few seconds, close your eyes. Imagine that you're immersed in your happy space. Bring your senses and emotions into play. I want you to imagine what it looks like. What are the sounds that you're hearing? Are there pleasant smells? Do you feel relaxed? Happy? How about restored? This is my happy place. This is an image from Rocky Mountain National Park, where I served as a seasonal ranger more than 20 years ago. That's shocking for me to even say. I'd be willing to bet that for the majority of you, your happy place involves some aspect of nature. That's what we tend to find. And there is a reason for this. Anecdotally, outdoor recreation enthusiasts have been seeking the restorative benefits of nature for well over a century. But only recently, research has begun to quantify these health benefits. And parks, which contain some of the most pristine ecosystems on Earth, promote human well-being through the ecosystem services that they provide. And this is where departments like mine, the Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management Department, housed uniquely within the College of Health and Human Development, work toward understanding these benefits and providing research that informs healthy human behaviors in parks and other protected area settings that promote human health while also stewarding the planet's resources. Now, we do this through a term called visitor use management. And this term is more important than ever, given the masses that are seeking the benefits found within nature, and specifically within America's best idea, as it's been termed, our national parks. For those of you that may not recognize this image, this is the backside of Half Dome in Yosemite National Park. I believe some of you mentioned Yosemite as being your favorite national park. So this is the backside of Yosemite National Park. And the fact is that our parks are popular, and more so than ever. This is an image of Half Dome during a typical summer day just a few years ago, prior to a research project that my department head, Dr. Peter Newman and colleagues, did to inform appropriate number of visitors during a given day. And they actually, through their research, informed a permitting process for the backside of Half Dome here that made this a much safer situation for visitors. And that is the heart of visitor use management. But with this amount of use and ever increasing, not only do we see the social aspects, but inevitably we see resource impacts, ecological impacts as well. And this is why it's so important to manage visitor use. And so what is visitor use management? Essentially, visitor use management is about getting the right number of people to a given recreation opportunity at the right time, providing those amenities and associated benefits while ensuring that the natural resources are protected in a manner that aligns with those management objectives. And this is so important. If you see all those labels on the upper right, all those logos on the upper right of this screen, you see that's all the federal land managing agencies coming together to band together with an interagency visitor use management council to help inform visitor use management. And these are the partners that we work with. So I'm part of a team called PARC, very cleverly termed here, Protected Area Research Collaborative within the Department of Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management. This includes myself, Drs. Peter Newman, Nathan Rigner, Alan Grafe, Andrew Mowen, and many others, as well as a cohort of graduate students. And you can see we've got a number of current graduate students working on these topics, but also we've got a number of graduate students that are professors at universities, other institutions studying these topics, as well as National Park Service employees, Grand Teton, National Park Service Office in Fort Collins, Colorado, Acadia. These are places that I actually heard some of those as favorite parks mentioned. You have Penn Staters and alumni as social scientists in these parks helping to improve and understand visitor use management in these spaces. Now, really quickly, we'll go into a little nerd tangent here and talk about visitor use management and how this works. So it's really about developing indicators and standards of quality for visitor use. Management objectives for parks tend to focus on a dual mandate to protect the natural resource while also providing those high quality recreation opportunities that we seek. So it really relies on indicators of quality and standards of quality. And I'll use a little health example here. So indicators are measurable, manageable variables that help define the quality of recreation areas, while standards define that minimum acceptable condition of the indicator variables. The health example will help drive this home. So imagine your health. An indicator of health in human terms is temperature. If your indicator is temperature, if you are out of standard, let's imagine you're beyond 98 degrees and it requires a management action. So indicator would be temperature, standard would be 98 degrees. If you're out of standard, it's going to require a management action. And it's a circular process of managing an adaptive management of visitor use. And that's what we do in the Protected Areas Research Collaborative. We inform visitor use management. I focus quite a bit on communication strategies, and I'll share a couple of examples with that. We also work with the National Park Service Healthy Parks, Healthy People program. And as I mentioned, our department is uniquely situated in the College of Health and Human Development, which is amazing for us to really think about these benefits that the parks provide for us. We also look at transportation systems and planning, how to get people to these spaces and access appropriately. My department head, Dr. Newman, does a lot with natural sounds and night skies. And I'll talk a bit about that with a quick example. And then I also do a lot of work with the Leave No Trace Center and social science around Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, as a little background, I bet a lot of people listening are familiar with them, but they're the leading educational entity providing outdoor education to reduce impacts associated with outdoor recreation. And they have a partnership with all the federal land managing agencies, and we do a lot of their social science to inform their education efforts. Now let's just briefly walk through how we collect some of these data. So here's an example from a Healthy Parks, Healthy People project in Gettysburg National Military Park. We tend to collect social science surveys at multiple sites in a given park, as we did in this example. We also try to collect data before a visitor has started to fully experience a park. So we want to know what those motivations are, what they expect from that visit. And we call this a pre-experience survey. We do surveys on paper, we do it on iPads, we perhaps ping people in real time via cell phones. So there's a lot of strategies we use for that. In this example in Gettysburg, we also wanted to see if we could encourage visitors to get some exercise by walking to experience some of the historic sites in the park. It's very much a drive-through park for many aspects of Gettysburg, but we were attempting to try and get people out of their vehicle and experience on foot, again, being more healthy in this park setting. So we systematically collected GPS tracks of visitors, accelerometer data, and did observations of visitor behavior when exposed to simple messages that would encourage physical activity. At the conclusion of the visit, we collect a post-survey to determine how their visit influenced them positively or negatively. Most often it's positive. For example, we were interested in what health benefits they received from their visit. And as a related aside, in this study, we did find that simple signage, such as the one below, walk in the footsteps of Confederate soldiers on one of the most famous attacks in American history, walk the 1 mile long Pickett's Charge, which I'm probably certain many of you have done. We were able to simply encourage behavior to walk the 1 mile Pickett's Charge. So we were able to encourage healthy behaviors in this particular study. I mentioned natural sounds, and natural sounds is a really important component for our national parks. In fact, natural sounds and natural dark skies are protected in national park units, just like other natural resources such as trees and water. There is actually a natural sounds and night skies division of the National Park Service. And my colleague, Dr. Peter Newman, does a lot of research with that organization. It's an extremely important component of visitor experience. And we're finding more and more often that natural sounds are important for various levels of health and well-being. Now natural sounds also influence wildlife, and we find that these are coupled human and ecological components. Yet increasing anthropogenic or human-caused noise can impact visitor experiences and also impact the ecological systems as well. So Dr. Newman and colleagues have conducted numerous studies working to improve visitor use management as it relates to natural and anthropogenic sounds. One quick example of this work regarding natural sounds and visitor use management did a study about 10 years ago in Muir Woods National Monument using an experimental design using messaging. He was able to significantly lower the levels of human-caused noise, and this was predominantly visitor noise, loud talking, etc., in the Cathedral Grove area of Muir Woods. And if you've been to Muir Woods, the Cathedral Grove is literally almost as if you walked into a library or a church setting. You are engulfed in these massive redwoods. And for many, it's an emotional experience. And it was fitting to have sound as an important component there. And the visitors told us that through numerous social science assessments. And through simple experimental design with a quiet day sign and a quiet zone sign, Dr. Newman and colleagues were able to significantly reduce the level of human-caused sounds in there, so much so that if you enter Cathedral Grove today, you're now entering a quiet zone in the park. So this is an applied finding that's actually been implemented in Muir Woods. Another example, with this increasing visitation to our U.S. national park system, we've got new managerial concerns. And one is the large amount of waste produced by visitors and park staff as well, and how this waste is being disposed of. In fact, there's almost 100 million pounds of waste generated each year in U.S. national park systems by visitors, park operations, park concessions, and other sources. And the proper management of this waste is essential for maintaining park quality. And one of the biggest issues is properly sorting waste from recyclable materials. So actually sorting at the bin, at the source, what is trash versus what is recyclables. In this particular project, we partnered with Subaru of America and the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, who I previously mentioned, for this initiative called Zero Landfill Initiative. And we conducted studies in Denali, Yosemite, and Grand Teton National Parks over a series of 3 years, ultimately developing very simple messaging to improve visitors' behavior to align with proper sorting of waste. And through simple signage, visitors were actually 2 times more likely to properly dispose of waste and recyclables in those 3 parks. So again, little steps proven through empirical work that can really make significant impacts on the park, the ecological and social well-being of these systems. Finally, COVID is, of course, on the mind of everyone. We recognize how important outdoor recreation has become for so many people during this current pandemic. And so recently, over the past few months, we worked with the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics to collect data from avid outdoor recreationists to understand their behavioral patterns, what they expect from park managers as locations reopen or facilitate recreation during this pandemic. And I've got a lot on this screen here, and I've put a link here to additional work or additional infographics that are really informative of these efforts. But we did a series of 3 efforts of data collection beginning in April and ending at the end of May, and collected over 2,500 surveys and responses from avid outdoor recreationists to inform these efforts. And what we found, behaviors are starting to get back to normal with regard to outdoor recreation, but recreationists are also basing their behaviors and intent to go outdoors on motivations to achieve those health benefits, those reasons we go to these spaces. But they're also really needing clear guidance from trusted health authorities. And they're expecting park managers to encourage preventative measures such as signage, hand sanitizer, encouraging visitors to wear a mask while recreating. And so with this effort, we've really made strides to help improve how managers can accommodate visitation during this challenging time. Now with that, I've given you a lot of information in a very limited amount of time because I know we want to open it for more questions. I'm going to stop sharing screen in just a minute, but you've got my email address there. You can also seek some more information on ResearchGate from some publications that we've got. And with that, I'll stop share and open the floor for more discussion.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. We have the Q&A function that is live and on the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. Go ahead and drop your questions in there, but we had some submitted beforehand. So let's stick on the topic of COVID-19. Here's an interesting question that came in. If someone were on the road full time, so living out of their RV and hopping from national park to national park, what advice would you give them during this time when some national parks and most national parks are closed?
So many of the national parks are opening in various phases. And so the best source of information right now is the National Park Service website for that particular unit. So because they are going in phases and because this is a dynamic situation where there have been closures of places that have opened, and even still with places open, and we had a brief conversation about this earlier, recognize that the park staff, they're short-staffed this year. They're very short-staffed, and they need people to really behave in a manner that aligns with those visitor those management objectives to protect that resource. And so my best advice is to get on the website, because they're doing their best to keep that up to date. They're not going to open us a park or even a portion of a park without having that on the given park website. And I would also say, make sure you're going to the .gov website for a national park, not a exterior site. It needs to be the .gov site, so you know it's officially from that particular park unit. Great
Absolutely,
question.
some good advice there. Sticking with COVID-19, any precautions or preparations that people should be taking, COVID-19 related or otherwise, as they plan maybe a summer trip to a national park?
Yeah, my family is doing this. It's a bizarre summer. I'm normally in the field in national parks collecting data, and this is the first summer in at least 10 years when I've not been collecting data in a park. So in turn, my family and I are going to some of these parks, again, trying to recognize that the parks are short-staffed and whatnot, and we're also trying to be safe ourselves. Masks are important from the data that we've collected, and most places are encouraging masks to be worn. There's a lot that you can do online in advance. So there's the National Park Pass that can be purchased online in advance, and that will alleviate some contact as you go into the gates. You can simply show your park pass and your ID, and they will let you right through. And that will be for any National Park Service unit. And so there's a lot of, I think it's more important than ever to plan ahead and prepare in this unique time period that we're facing.
Anything that you would advise in terms of the national parks, if you're talking to people at the Park Service, suggestions on what balanced visitation policies might look like as they consider opening up? You might expect, people have been home for a while, so there may be a mad rush to the parks now. What might be a balanced approach look like?
Yeah, so they actually have, we've got some early data from some of our park partners that did occur. As places have opened, there has been a bit of a mad rush. So far, things are still a little bit slower than a normal summer in most circumstances, but parks, because of this, have implemented, let's just say Acadia, for example, or Rocky Mountain National Park. They've implemented day use permitting systems that have not been in place in the past. And so again, more than ever, plan ahead and prepare to ensure that you don't arrive at that entrance and say, be turned around because you're not able to actually go because you don't have a day use permit. This is an abnormal time period. And because the parks are short staffed in many circumstances, because they weren't able to bring upon their seasonal hires, they are trying to limit capacities. And that's because they're short staffed, but also to keep everyone protected and enabling social distance. There's a lot of parks that have in the past operated shuttle systems that are closed this season. So they can't accommodate as many people, and they're trying to limit the number entering at the gate in some circumstances.
Now, how does this work, Derrick? Is it each park comes up with their own visitor management process, or is there a universal practice that's employed around the country?
That's a really good question and a bit of a tough one. It's coming a bit down to the individual park superintendent, but that also involves entities that are beyond that at the DC level, where the National Park Service resides, the home office there. A colleague from Rocky Mountain National Park, for example, they were advised to open, but they're also taking into consideration these gateway communities. So Rocky Mountain National Park, for example, has the gateway community of Estes Park and Grand Lake on the other side. And there's a lot of retirees and potentially at-risk populations in those gateway communities. And so the park was made very concerted efforts to align with what outside the park was doing, what those gateway communities were doing, what the governor of Colorado was doing. And so that's a really good example in my mind of how entities work together. To get back to your question, Paul, it more or less depends. So every park is a bit different. And I would say that these big parks, your Yellowstone, your Grand Canyon, they were asked to open a bit earlier because they are those prominent, well-known parks, but they all have different regulations taking place.
This one's more of a comment than a question, but Peter Mecca just put in the chat that he and his family returned from a long weekend at Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge, and the park was very prepared in terms of signage and other information to promote health and safety. And while on the beach, people maintained social distance, and so great work for the National Park Service there. Let's stick with the visitor management. So Beth asks, some parks like Grand Canyon had shuttles to cut down on individual vehicle traffic. Others, such as Yellowstone, do not. Are more parks trying to add shuttles?
That's a really good question, Beth. Yes, I would say by and large, when it's feasible, parks are trying to accommodate shuttle systems. Not to selfishly promote a book that my colleague has, but my department head actually has a book about transportation systems in national parks. What they've found through quite a bit of research is that these shuttle systems are great to accommodate the levels of visitor use that we have. However, there are some unintended consequences with shuttles, because it's almost the field of dreams. If you create it, they will come. And so when we talk about capacities, when you implement a shuttle system, there will be more people. There will be less personal vehicles, or personal vehicles will be limited, but that won't necessarily limit the volume of people on the trail systems, creating some of these other social dynamics or ecological impacts. And so while shuttle systems are amazing for accommodating use, there's also some associated trade-offs with them as well. But parks are trying to very wisely implement these things. And again, it also relies heavily on those outside entities as well. They have to be in coordination with the state and federal highways as well to implement such a process.
Yeah. Practical question coming in here. So if a park is open, does that mean the restrooms are open? And if so, are they cleaned more frequently and thoroughly than they might have been previously?
Very good question. So this has been a mixed bag. I talked with a colleague in Shenandoah National Park earlier in the week, and some of their restroom facilities are open, but a lot of them are closed. And so be prepared for closures of a lot of your facilities that may have been open in the past. And that is in part due because they're trying to, with their limited staff, trying to keep those facilities that are open clean to the extent possible. And so limited staff, limited capacities to clean, limited facilities open. Don't expect for the volume, every bathroom to be open, every visitor center to be open.
Yeah. Andy wants to go hiking in the parks, and he's wondering if there's guidelines and strategies regarding when it's okay to use a social path versus staying on an official trail when the trail is flooded or otherwise in a very bad shape.
Oh, that's a really good question, Andy. So the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics actually has some great guidance on this. You could imagine that if everyone went off trail, you'd have a very new wide trail, right? So the general practice is to stay on designated and managed trails, because once a footpath starts, it generally turns into yet another established trail, and either it needs to be closed or managed as such. Going around puddles is generally, we suggest that people don't. We suggest that you walk through it and you come prepared for the elements that park might provide for you. If possible, stay on trail, also recognizing that, there might be that vista over there that you just can't resist going to see, and try and do it discreetly and watch out for the vegetation on the way.
Great. Question coming in. Often parks have a period when it's free to enter. Will that occur this year?
I think it has occurred. And I think I have heard rumor, and I can't necessarily speak to this, not being a Park Service employee, that they may do another free weekend, fee-free weekend. And note that there are, I'm a big advocate for the federal lands pass, and there are discounts for veterans, there are discounts for current service members. And while I wish that some of these units were absolutely free, the funds that go back to these spaces for the deferred maintenance is really important. When you think about other costs that you might spend on other recreation opportunities, our parks are still relatively cheap. And again, in my opinion, and Ken Burns, created this phrase, definitely America's best ideas. I just think we have such amazing resources at our fingertips.
Absolutely. Well, look, the question about will there be free periods leads into maybe a bigger question about funding for our national parks. But before I get to that, let's check off one of these conservation questions. Which is more detrimental to our parks? A run on them like we might have after the pandemic when a lot of people are going to the parks, or the closure that they've just experienced when they're maybe not being as maintained as they would if they were open?
That's a tough question. I have maybe more of an opinion, but not grounded in research per se. I know that when the parks have been closed with regard to staffing, I've seen evidence of where visitors may have not behaved in a manner that aligns with those management objectives. And so that's a tough situation where a park may be closed for staff, so there's not staffing in place, but they're open to the public. And more important than ever for visitor education and proper ethics to be in place so people behave in a manner that aligns with those management objectives. What we've seen with some of the COVID-related trends are more use around local and urban parks rather than your bigger parks that are perhaps a little bit more remote Western parks. Right. They're certainly experiencing visitation now, but we've seen a pretty big increase in more of the local park use. And that's shifting a bit now, but at the front of our closure study, we found a lot of local park use rather than the bigger park use and going further distances.
So we're going to go into a subject area that I'm not all that familiar with. So forgive me if I don't ask this question the right way, but the question is, do you have any data about possibly establishing dual funding streams, maybe separating how parks are funded in terms of, instead of giving one lump sum based on visitation numbers, might there be a stream based on visitation and kind of the public service that national parks provide, and another one towards the resource management side? The questioner seems to think that because it's based on visitation, a lot of the funding goes towards getting people into the parks versus actually what's needed to maintain the resources of that park, the natural resources.
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And I think that's one that probably those brilliant minds at the DC level of the Park Service all the way down to your resource protection specialist in these parks deal with on a daily basis is the Park Service has a very unique challenge and a dual mandate stemming from the founding of the National Park Service to accommodate recreational use while also protecting that resource. And of course, a lot of that comes to funding and how you can fund different aspects, whether that's visitor management and accommodating visitors or the protection of the resource. And I don't have an answer for that and what that equation should or could look like, but it's one that they're mandated to follow. And that's, again, why I love my job and why we're trying to, if you're accommodating visitor use, do it appropriately and make sure that those visitors are appropriately behaving in those spaces that do protect those resources. I think it's possible. It is possible. And it's not always a limited number. You might have a group of 10 people that are behaving very ethically and protecting those resources versus a group of 2 that are absolutely, wrecking a natural resource element. So it's very much about the behavior and educating.
So there's some well-known, so certainly federal funding and public funding is an option, but there are also some companies that are really committed to helping in this space. Patagonia, REI, you mentioned Subaru earlier in your presentation. How else can private sector funding have an impact?
That's such an interesting question, and one that a colleague of mine in recreation park tourism management, Dr. Andy Mallon, is really an expert on, is some of the aspects of corporate sponsorship and privatization of parks. There's a lot of good, in my opinion, happening from some of these organizations helping parks. We do know that federal funding or state funding, depending on the entity, the park, is not always sufficient to help keep these places in running order. And so having these corporations with altruistic missions, and I'm sure they're also getting other benefits from this.
Sure.
But they in many circumstances have, in my opinion, helped substantially. And it's an interesting trend with not only corporations, but friends groups. And so advocate groups for these parks, there's a lot of parks that now have friend groups or associations that are raising money, facilitating volunteer groups. And so whether it be from a corporation or a friends group, I think those are really needed entities for these parks to survive and help accommodate the amount of use that they're getting.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's stay in that space for a second. Now, we talked about some private funding, right, from places like Patagonia and REI. But what about, what are your thoughts on chains now making appearances in our national parks? Starbucks, for example, and other restaurants having their locations in these national parks.
Oh, that's a tough one. I struggle with it a bit. I'm a purist. I was a backcountry ranger. And so that image from Rocky Mountain National Park and the thought of let's just say a McDonald's sign up above that lake sort of crushes me. At the same time, as I say that, well, let's just put that out of our heads. I don't want to see that.
Can you see the reflection in that nice mountain lake of the arches?
There's an important component that we study a lot called recreation opportunity spectrum. And it's about zoning off different types of desires and different types of uses in these spaces. And there's 2 terms, one that come to mind with that. It's front country and it's back country. And so back country would be more of that wilderness experience where you would not expect to see such a thing. Front country is a bit of a slippery slope. Many of our national parks have trains that run right through them. They have gorgeous historic hotels that were established around the time when the parks were established to get visitors into these spaces. Now you can't even get a room at some of these places if you don't have it a year in advance, if not more. So when you build it, they will come. One aspect that is the double side to this, and do you put in a Starbucks at a visitor center in a park? If that could help bring in more diverse demographics, perhaps that is a good thing, because not everyone is using our parks. And in my opinion, we do need to increase the diversity and increase the access to our parks. Without that, our parks are not necessarily going to be valued in the future as they have been in the past. And I recognize that's a slippery slope. And I of course think that the zoning is very important. But I think there's a right place for some commerce and definitely a divided wrong place for some of those things. At the same time, I think access and inclusion is very important and moving forward for these places.
Yeah, you touched on this a little bit earlier, and we're going to get back to the diversity, equity, and inclusion question in a second because I want to ask you to dig a little deeper on that. But you touched on this a little bit earlier. Dan Gordon put this question in here, but I'm going to lump a bunch of other questions in with it. Dan's son works at Yellowstone, and he says his main job is to keep people from petting the bison and not walking into the geyser fields or chasing the bears. But you mentioned reduced staffing at the national parks this summer. So with the reduction of staffing and the increase in restrictions on what people can do, right? He's not only going to be stopping people from petting bison now, but making sure that they're wearing their mask and keeping socially distant. What are things, you've worked as a ranger, right? How would you train or coach rangers for this kind of environment? And what can, to lump in the other question, what is the role of volunteers in national parks and how can they be helpful in this regard?
Oh, those are great. And Dan, give my best to your son because I'm sure he is working very hard this summer. Yes, as we mentioned, park staff are a bit short-staffed because many of the seasonal hires, for a variety of reasons, were not able to come aboard in many settings this summer. So there's people doing the job of 5 in many places. What we found through our work is there tends to be 2 leverage points to make visitors or encourage visitors to behave in a manner that aligns with those management objectives. And right now, it is protecting the resource and those wildlife that were mentioned. It's also possibly social distancing and trying to encourage that and these preventative health measures. So these 2 leverage points that we tend to find are that people are motivated for themselves. So thinking about what those motivations that those people are seeking and desire. And so trying to leverage and communicate with them positively in that manner. People generally don't like restrictions. So if you can help educate positively, you tend to have a better reaction. The second piece there is the resource. People are there to experience that natural resource, the beauty, the natural sounds, etc. So if you can leverage and try and blend that person's motivation with protection of that resource, the reason they're there, and try and bring it home and make that real to them, that tends to work. It tends to work. People generally, we found this time and time again with leave no trace related studies, people want to do the right thing. It's just generally helping them get there. And a lot of that's education and leverage points.
Yeah, I would imagine protecting wildlife and protecting the natural resources are paramount in these environments. So what are there parts of the park that actually get opened and closed because of how the different native species, whether it's plants or animals, grow into those spaces or inhabit those spaces?
Yes.
And really, I mean, the question's focused on with the parks having been closed, right? Animal migration and animal movement on these parks may have been freer than if there were thousands of visitors, right? And so how do they manage the reopening of these that in a way that respects where the animals may have moved to?
That's a great question. We've got colleagues that we're absolutely trying to track wildlife behaviors during these closures because that hypothesis that you just mentioned, Paul, that's what they anticipated. Perhaps wildlife were behaving in a different manner in light of visitors not being present, or perhaps now less visitors than in a previous summer. There are wildlife closures. Absolutely, they tend to do so during migrations or mating seasons. So they certainly do close off different areas of parks and use zoning to do that frequently, actually. There have been, I believe, day before yesterday, there was an incident maybe it was last week in Yellowstone, a negative human engagement with, I believe it was a bison. And these things do occur. And so I think the parks to the extent possible do try and mitigate that, but it's also on the visitor. And, I failed to mention sort of on the last question, the volunteer aspect.
Right.
And I do think it's, in light of short staff, in light of this unique situation that we're in, if you've got the capacity to help a park out, maybe it's your local park, maybe it is a national park across the country that you can hopefully visit safely. If you've got the opportunity to visit and volunteer, there's a lot of volunteer organizations, whether it's those friend groups or I see Michael mentioned volunteer.gov. Now is the time, if you've got the capacity to do so, it's needed to protect these visitor resources and help keep everybody healthy and safe while they're in these spaces.
Excellent. So I want to go back to the question about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not just a national park issue, right? I mean, we deal with that as a country right now, but it extends even to just access to the great outdoors, right? So two questions have come in here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion in the outdoors is a huge issue now. What is Penn State and maybe what is your research doing to help make outdoors more inclusive and welcoming to people of color? And then Vic Gladstone asks a question, but maybe brings up a good suggestion as well in terms of when we're inviting companies into these spaces to have like a coffee kiosk. Are they being invited with diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind, and maybe looking to reach out to minority-owned businesses and as an opportunity to bring others into the park?
I think that that's a great suggestion. I can't speak to whether that's happening at the concession level. I would certainly agree that that's a good concept and a good idea to be bringing that to light. I can speak to the research that's taking place in our department and broader beyond our department. Access has historically been an issue, and there have been and still remain inequities with regard to access. And some of that is transportation and cost associated with that. Some of it is access because of fees to get into parks. Some of it is because of preference, for outdoor recreation settings and what these spaces may not provide. And so these are top of mind right now. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer speaking from a white male privilege standpoint. But it's something that we're certainly aware of. And again, I think it goes back for me. I was able to experience a park and a national park fairly early on in my youth, but others don't have that opportunity. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And I think we want to provide opportunities for everyone to have access. And I think the Healthy Parks, Healthy People program for the National Park Service and partners like our institution that are working on studies associated with Healthy Parks, Healthy People, access is one of the big keys there. And they're working toward it, but we've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go, and a lot of empathy, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of awareness, and all the way up.
Yeah. As COVID-19 hit, right, a lot of us were forced to shift and adjust the way we conduct our businesses, right? The Alumni Association has moved to virtual platforms like this. And I know the National Park Service also did that. And while it was a way to continue to keep people connected to the parks, right, it also probably had an impact on some of the things that we're talking about here in terms of equity and inclusion, and that it probably opened the parks up to many more people than before they started the work that they have done since the middle of March, and the programs that they have offered and how they've made that available to people for free. Can you talk a little bit about where people might be able to find those resources or some of the strategies that they employed in that regard?
Yeah, I love this, and I'm not very tech savvy. I was fortunately able to get on Zoom here today, and that's sort of some of the extent of my knowledge. But my wife is pretty tech savvy, and she's actually introduced me to some amazing park resources right now. And so, in light of this awful situation that we find ourselves in, of course, there are always amazingly positive things that can come out of this. There have been some really cool initiatives from individual parks to create virtual experiences. And that could be the gateway to people experiencing these spaces. So maybe they do get to experience a virtual hike in Zion via Instagram, because I did one of those the other day with my daughter, and she loved it. And maybe that's the access point. That's the starting point. And then, you know, hopefully in the future, somebody's got the motivation to actually experience it on site for themselves. There's some really cool, some of it's via the Park Service website. Others, I think it's a little bit better if you can get on some of their social media links, and that's from friends groups. But most of the national park individual units have their own Facebook site. They have their own Instagram site, and I've seen some really neat virtual experience things on those outlets.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to throw this question out there, and I'm going to allow you to dodge it if it is too political. But because it's a federal department, right? The Department of Interior. People are wondering if you know, the change of administrations as we go back from party to party, if that has an impact on the funding of our parks. I'll ask the question that way, which is a little different than it was asked, and I apologize, Galaxy S10, for not asking it that way, but I don't want to take this too political.
Sure. From my standpoint, we have not necessarily seen it sway that much from political affiliation. We've got most national park employees that I've worked with, they care so deeply about that mission and the resources and providing amazing opportunities that I don't see it affected at that level. They may have a different standpoint on the funding and how that's allocated, but fortunately, I've not seen that sea change from administration to administration necessarily. It's been fairly consistent.
Final question before we wrap up here. I know, you know, conservation of natural resources, you know, doesn't start and stop when you enter and leave a national park, right? But there are things we can be doing every day in our lives to help protect natural resources. What are some of those things that we can be doing right here in our own yards, in our own towns, at parks that are local to us?
Oh, that's a great one. You know, I think it's as simple as everywhere provides some unique opportunity, whether it's your backyard park, whether it's you know, your state park that you drive to, or whether it's your national park across the country. Start with the local and see if there's volunteer opportunities. There's also just general environmentally friendly behaviors. You know, trying to recycle, trying to reduce your emissions. If you can walk somewhere or ride a bike rather than hopping in the car, all the better, right? And these are things that do remarkably affect all the way up to our national parks. I was working in Sequoia National Park a few years ago on a research project, and they have some of the worst air quality in the country at times because it floats up from the valley below. And so those people at their homes definitely affect what's happening all the way up at Sequoia National Park. And so there are things that we can do on an everyday basis, these environmentally friendly behaviors that we're all aware of and we hear often about, that can absolutely affect local to more global. So start local. For my daughter and I, we try and go pick up trash, as simple as that. And that's more of a visual eyesore than necessarily an ecological eyesore, but you know, I'm trying to ingrain that even at the young age with her. So do it at a local level.
Absolutely. People want more information about the work that you're doing. I know it was on the final slide, but if you want to go ahead and give a website again and maybe your email address, people can contact you. I know I didn't get a chance to get to all of these questions, but there's still an unquenchable thirst for the work that you're doing.
Well, that's rarely stated, particularly from my students. Ha ha ha. But Well, I'd be more than happy to answer emails. The college website and our department website, you can just search RPTM Penn State University. I have some amazing colleagues. I was fortunate to do this today, but I have some colleagues that are just outstanding, doing a variety of work from tourism and events all the way to park research, like I discussed today. We're pretty varied and, as I mentioned, uniquely housed within the College of Health and Human Development. What's more important than health and well-being? And to me, it stems from our natural resources as well. And I'm just so proud to be a part of this kind of work and be a part of Penn State and this amazing alumni. I mean, at what point do you at midday on a webinar get as many participants to listen to a nerd like myself talk about parks? This is just amazing.
Well, Derrick, we want to thank you for joining us today and spreading the good news about the work that you are doing here at Penn State and in our national parks. And we want to thank all of you for joining us on this latest edition of our virtual speaker series. Again, check out our website at alumni.psu.edu/events for more upcoming virtual events that we will be offering. I also want to remind everybody you'll be getting a post-event email from us. Go ahead and fill out that survey and give us feedback on what you would like to see us do better, more of, different in these kind of virtual interactions. We will also have the links to, we'll have Dr. Taff's email address in that email that we're going to send out to you. We'll also have some of the links that were shared here in the chat. Thanks again for your support of Penn State and the Alumni Association. Great to see everybody out here today. And we are
Penn State.